I just told you my name and my clan in the language. It's an Ojibwe language. It's what they would call High Algonquin, which is understandable to my son, who's a Penobscot Indian. His mom's from the reservation in Old Town, Maine, and but it's identical, understandable to the Pennacook people who were here, who lived right in this area. Specifically today, we know it either as the two main centers were Wamasett in downtown Lowell, or Pawtucket, where the falls are. It's literally the falls. So they could be named the Wamasets, the Pennacooks, or the Pawtuckets, and they all are correct. They're all referring to the exact same people. But the other center, of course, was at Concord, where the village of Pennacook was. It was a palisaded, protected village up on the bluffs above, across the river from the Capitol building. You can see it up on the parking lot of the Fish and Game Department. They believe that's where this palisaded castle, they call it, was. And it was built. Why do you need a palisaded wall? Why does anybody need a fort? To keep somebody out. You need protection from somebody when you have something like that. Otherwise, you just live out in the open. You wouldn't care. But when you're palisading yourself in a fort, that's because there's Mohawks around. And during the early 17th century, increasingly, there was a series of, you want to call them the Beaver Wars, where the Mohawks were the Iroquois people of New York State were coming into New England and hitting these guys hard, because there was for the Pennacook, it was once in our region, from here all the way north to Canada, to New Brunswick, the great rivers that come out of the mountains come into the sea. And each one of those, you can look at it this way, is its own Indian nation. It almost actually is the territory, and in school, we'll call that the watershed, because the watershed, including all the springs that drain into that river, that is just the most logical, simple way of saying that's our territory. You go over that mountain, the water goes the other direction, like the Continental Divide out west. One side goes into the Pacific, and this side goes into the Mississippi, and then ultimately to the Gulf. So here the watershed was important for the river systems. Usually the main village is about halfway, generally speaking, where they plant the corn and then leave, because it's all about food. Here, we wait for the fish to come up in the spring. This is called a lester, or a leister, and it's a salmon spear. But if you have it in your canoe, it can be used for poling too. So if you see the early drawings of canoes, you almost always see one of these lesters sticking out of the tip of the canoe. It's just like in there, even off season. So they still keep them. It's a cool thing. Most of them are cut to 5 feet, so they can fit in a museum case, or on a somebody bought one as a souvenir when they're up north with a Maine guide. Like, hey chief, you want to sell me that souvenir? And so you can't bring it back on the steamship or the train when it's a 25-foot long salmon spear. So this barely fits on my roof without really getting in the way, but they were longer. And you sit up on the rock and you wait for the salmon to come up, or other migratory fish that come off the ocean. What is that word? Andronogamous? They come annually off the ocean to spawn upstream. Some fish species go to the muddy ponds, some will go to clear brooks, streams, and others will go to lakes. And wherever they spawn, so different species does different things. But you have to be on that rock that season. That's the whole. And then once two weeks later, it's over. Then you got to move on to what's used to be Purity Supreme in downtown. What do you guys got now? Hannaford, or what, or Shaw's, or Demoulas? Stop and Shop. Well, if Stop and Shop closes, we're in trouble. So you got to go. Now we got to go to Lowell or to Nashua on Sunday. It used to be the Blue Laws. You want beer, you got to go up to Nashua. Everybody knew that, right? Well, don't you guys worry about that, because you don't need to know. I don't personally drink alcohol myself. Haven't since I could tell you that story, and I could tell you where it happened. Robbins Hill was standing up there drinking beer on my buddy's car. He's not even from here, but we were up there, and I saw this black thing swoop his head, and he had no idea. He was just talking, and I'm looking at him going, you did not even see that. I was just beginning to have my eyes opened in the Indian world. I was hitting the powwow circuit really hard. I was dancing, singing, whatever I was, and I was still hanging out with this guy. And he had no idea that this black, I think it was an owl, but like inches from his head. He had no idea. And I'm like, that's it. I never want to be, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. That was like the moment. Robbins Hill. And I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I haven't drank. Well, no, my martial arts teacher's son was murdered in California. I had to have a sip of some, I don't know what he put in the hot coffee, but I had to have a sip of that, and I had to have a sip of this very special wine in France. His father put it in the cherry bottle in a little jar after the war. This guy had this, it was cherry-soaked brandy. You have to have one of the cherries, my father, after the war. I have to use the Italian accent because I don't know French accent. You have to have, I'm like, okay, for the honor of the family, I had to have one of these cherries. Oh my goodness. Don't get a lit match near that. It was unbelievable. So other than that, I know Indian people today, anyway, brandy was a part of history. Rum was a new thing because of the sugar from the islands was a new thing. And it has a dramatic effect on native people. The native people do not have a tolerance for wheat, lactose, meaning milk products, or alcohol or sugar. They never had any of that stuff. It's devastating. It's brand new. They're only 300 years out of the bush. They have not had any of that stuff. And for eons, since our European and everywhere else on the planet has had all this other stuff of various things, but the native people never had any of that stuff. So how does that affect their health today? Massive diabetes. I see some really, really complicated illnesses on the reservations, like more than any other population. Maybe a lot of African American families too. A lot of funny genetics. Maybe all of us. Maybe I'm just seeing things through a prism. But these guys were just trying to live seasonally. And living here, imagine, as I was trying to say, the what happens if see how long it is? I was hitting the ceiling in the other building like immediately, but even here, like.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
I see the spear in the middle
Okay.
of it. So
Yep. I'm sorry. So imagine the fish is a narrow-backed fish. So this literally guides, pinches, and catches all in one. So even if I hit it on the side, it'll guide it center. It'll center it each time. The spear, or sometimes it's just a screwdriver I've seen, breaks the back of the spine of the animal, or pinches it double, so it's triangulated in the center.
It catches it partway through. It's thinner.
Right. So this is it's still flipping around, and I've got it right in the center. So this flexes a little bit. So that it's very efficient. But they're not just unique to North America. I've seen a prehistoric one from Denmark.
How does it get from being caught onto the tip?
It'll move through there. So if I did it too hard, I actually would impale my own hand. So this flexes. If you use the grain of the ash or something, it'll flex.
So it keeps going forward. And then
Yes. So it's a tremendous, it's a tremendous strike. And when this is wet, it gets more flexible. And if it gets too flexible, I might have to actually tie it so it doesn't even either flex too much and break, or some of the older ones, even the metal ones, they'll put wire or cod line so that it doesn't go all the way down and it's easier to get off. So now you're talking mass production. So there's a concern for how many do you need? But you only got one chance at this. So, but what happens if if now the Pennacook are now not able to efficiently go to the ocean, because now Amesbury and Haverhill and all those places down at the coast, now, what's that other one there? All next to Amesbury, Plum Island, all that, you know, where is it? Newburyport, all in there. That's heavy Puritan settlement now. So now the Pennacooks can't just go down and have clam bakes anymore. It's over. So now they're actually, part of their lifestyle is now restricted to Wamiset and north. What, do you want to catch a bunch of snapping turtles out here in Chase's Pond? I mean, is that where you're at? So that is where they're at. Or they head up to Winnipesaukee. So really, they're now, it's like checkmate with these guys. And once you restrict them of their gunpowder, now they can't even, because Massachusetts Bay Colony, even as late as 1704, this is right out of Boston. This is the truck house price list. And there's shot and gunpowder on here. Shot and gunpowder. Not bullets. Just shot. But there's no guns on here. Massachusetts is almost always zero tolerance. Kind of sounds contemporary, like today. They don't like guns today. But they sure didn't like it in Indian hands. So this was a real thing for them. But it was, in all cases, as far as the fur trade went, which we're going to get into, cloth and shirts. Here's a linen shirt. Blankets, cloth for the women's skirts and dresses, lightweight shawl blankets, and leggings for both sexes, men and women. Blue and red. Blue and red is the type of wool. This is a cheap wool, but it was always blue and red. And what would happen is cloth is over 50% in all cases of political gifts as well as the fur trade. So any product that I bring in our beaver pelts or moose skins or other animals, we're going to get we're going to trade for this hardware. And there's only a certain amount of stuff. I don't want to live in that house. A lot of Indians would visit and they just sleep outside. They couldn't stand living with these people. Even captive Englishmen, English people, women too, coming back from being prisonered in the Indian nations after a raid on one of the towns, right? Sometimes the women would marry the men. They're Indian men. Some very famous, there was some very famous accounts of these women. They never wanted to go back. Or they married a Frenchman up in Canada and became French Canadian. They became Catholic. That just freaked out the Puritans here. Nothing could be worse. Nothing. In fact, two of them, as they're being carted away in another canoe, the mother's last words were, "Johnny, don't become an Indian." That's not what she said. She said, "Johnny, don't become Catholic." Twice that happened. I got two accounts, Mary Rollinson and John Giles. That was the last thing they ever heard their mother say to them, "Don't become a Catholic." And that's where these guys are at. And I'm not saying one thing or another about any of the parties. I'm just saying the way they believed. And they firmly believed it. And they'd say, Cotton Mather in Boston would look up at the sky and there was like a cloud formation that looked like a bow and an arrow. And all of Boston swore that was a portent for an Indian war. They said this was an omen. And anytime there was a catastrophe, whether it was an Indian raid, a fire, a drought, or anything, they always said it was because the people in Boston were immoral and not going to the Sabbath, respecting the. I mean, that's how they believed. That's how the Indian people believed. That's how the French believed. They believed in that stuff. This was the real world that they all lived in. It was a spiritual world. I don't care. I'm not in a public school. We can talk about this. Just can't talk about this in public school apparently. But I'm telling you, this is how they lived and breathed and lived and died by those beliefs. And the other side, you couldn't mend those bridges sometimes. Sometimes you could. And I find that the most beautiful part of our history is that the people as we were saying earlier, imagine all these towns around here got burned to the ground. Chelmsford didn't. Chelmsford had this love-hate relationship with the Wamisit Indians in the Pennacook over there in Lowell, Old Lansing, and his people. And they were the only Indian friends that the English had, to be honest with you. When King Philip's War erupted in the 1670s, all around New England, it was the most devastating war by percentage. Like, what was it, 90-something% of all towns in Massachusetts were attacked. Like, and there's so many of them were wiped out. It's unheard of. And by population, the amount of deaths beats the Civil War, hands down. The amount of casualties. So this was a really devastating time. And the entire frontier, this was the frontier. Chelmsford was it. North of here, it's Canada, baby. You know, you go north of here, there's nothing up there. Tingsboro had a couple in Dunstable. That was like the northern. But this was the Merrimack River was the DMZ line. That was it, the Merrimack. And so who do you have? Who can fight another native but another native? Because these English guys with their buckled shoes, they're not going to go chasing these guys down. They're not going to outrun me. I can outshoot them, outrun them, and they'll never find me. My Achilles tendon is my family. So if they can find my village and my camp where my family is, all right, you got my attention now. You can take hostages or kill them outright, which is never going to go good for them, because I will never forget that. I will not forgive that. I will never forget it. And if I do, my son who's out there, he will pick up the hatchet. It will not be forgotten. And this is traditional around the world, is it not? And there's a way that if your private, your family blood, it's all you have in the world. And they've done these people of the offending nation. So I can find some farmer in Connecticut. If he's an Englishman, okay. But I know he's not a Frenchman. So Frenchman I'm not going to touch. I know he's French. But I don't care if he's from North Carolina or Virginia. He's toast. He's coming home. I actually want a prisoner. That's what I want. Because our women would adopt these guys. I would actually give the women the option. Do you want this guy? 2 stout warriors holding him. There's a long line of village people. And we all got sticks and clubs, and he's going to run the gauntlet. And these 2 stout men bring this person, and they're like, okay, you know what to do. Run! Run, Forrest, run! It's like what was that Forrest Gump movie? Okay, run, Forrest. So this person tries to run, and everybody's going to take out some passive aggression, sometimes a little bit more than passive. But by the 7 Years' War, the Abenakis under the Jesuit up at St. Francis, they were just a slap. So things are changing, but they symbolically still had to do it. They were still obliged to take out the social aggression on this prisoner. Just with a slap at that point. But here, if that guy falls, I'm going to keep pounding him until he gets up. Maybe he never gets up. And okay, that's the will of the Great Spirit. He doesn't get up. But if he makes it, bloody and whatever, he gets to the end, we pick him up. They either smear him with black paint, and he gets led over to the pole where he's going to be burned and tortured because he's the enemy of our family. And guess what? It's our family. So where's Deer Clan? It's our prerogative. We're the Deer Clan police. You're the Deer Clan mothers and the grandmothers and the clan mothers. You give us the authority to do this. There is nobody else. The Bear Clan doesn't care. It's not their business, actually. Unless we come to them with wampum belts and plead with them kind of as fellow tribes people. But really, it's a family affair. So this is our clan business. So we're never sure, when you're reading history accounts, what's really going on. This Indian party shows up in Andover and kills Pasco Chubb at the end of the King William's War. Why did that happen? He was a commander up at Pemaquid, up at the fort that the French took with murderous jerk. And he had murdered some chiefs under a flag of truce. Well, guess what? The very last action of King William's War, they came down in the winter and went right to his house in Andover and killed him. The very first action was another commander at Pemaquid, was Waldron in Dover. The very first action of the war was, well, actually half of them took out Pemaquid, the fort, and the other half went right to Dover and killed Waldron. Because he had done this same thing that Chubb had done at Pemaquid again. But anyway, it just shows the family never forgot. But they also say they never forgave an insult. They never forgot a good favor. So in Andover, on that same raid, they knew another guy who had been friendly to them. And I want to say his name was Buttonwood or something like that. But he was well known to these Indian people, this war party. And just like the angel of death, they did stop and say, listen, we got to ransack your house a little bit there, Earl, whatever his name is. But we're not going to kill you. Don't worry. Not going to harm your family. You're okay. But Pasco Chubb, now they used to beat him up in high school, in junior high, with a name like Pasco Chubb. I'm sure everybody just beat him up because he had a name like that. But anyway, he was known on the frontier. He was a marked man by those Indian families. They just knew. They just knew everybody knew where everybody lived. This was a small world here. This was a very intimate world. So Wanalancet, they knew Robbins and Adams, all these families, Parkhurst, they all knew each other because they would trade during peacetime. But during the wars, it kind of got weird because now you're obligated to, the Indians are obligated to turn in their guns to prove their friendliness to the English settlers. And they're like, well, how are we going to hunt there, smart guy? We need to hunt. Well, you got some fish hooks. Yeah, but not. We have fish spears, but not in February. You could do some pond fishing, I guess, but ice fishing, which this actually doubles as a ice fishing because you can get eel with it in the mud, So it has other purposes. This one is it was one of these old sword blades, and here even the English were selling sword blades. He goes two sword blades, 1.5 beaver skin in season. So this is a broken sword blade. I can make 2 of these spears, but the blade is long enough. You walk up on snowshoes in the deep snow, which is really an efficient way of hunting. And you walk up, and you can walk up on a moose and spear it, and this blade will get back through the back into the vital organs and kill them. It's efficient. Totally illegal. We do not recommend this by the Fish and Game Department of the state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's illegal. We don't spear animals. However, at this time, it was very efficient. You don't have to use a bullet. You don't have to use an arrow. So this was what this was, and I believe from the Hannah Dustin story over there in the Haverhill Historical Society, I made a copy of it. Here's a shorter version. She called it, when she escaped from the Pentacooks that captured her, all that's left is the blade with a tang, and they call it a knife. So I made a copy of it, and it's not an even thing, but it looked to me, as a blacksmith, it looked to me like it was possibly a cut down sword or hammered out of an old file. I don't know which, but I just made a copy of it because it serves as a lance. My sister, when we were doing the bear hunt, I had just shot the bear and it ran off in the darkness. Yeah, I shot it at night because it was on my sister's farm. It's illegal to shoot at night, but I did. And I shot it with double ball from a musket. And anyway, the next morning we tracked it and I found the blood, and so I ran where I thought he went down to water, down the hill into the swamps, and she went up the hill. But she had I shot it, I saw it, I found it, I shot it again, he died, and I ran home, and I'm like, I don't know what to do, because the thing is almost 300 pounds. And so I called her. She's got a cell phone, so I called her on the cell phone. I go, Kate, where are you? She goes, I'm right here. I poked it. She had the spear with her. She had a spear and a cell phone. And she's looking at a potentially angry, half-dead bear with terror in its eyes. She goes, no, it's dead. I poked it. Like, Like, okay, great. That actually part of that. Anyway, but what I'm saying is these objects there's no accident here. This one detaches for ice fishing. So you spear. It's some of them will call it a sturgeon spear, but the point detaches theoretically. Yeah. Okay, I jammed it in there from traveling, so it would. Yeah, okay. And then you through an ice hole, and then you pull the animal back in. And then here you come up later, and you can see there's one on this board. Whereas one side shows native traditional technology, bone, stone, and antler, and like that, and native copper. Whereas this side shows the imported European metal, and so on. Where you can see the dart head here is actually made out of deer or moose leg bone, where the other side is iron. What a great, but the technology is 100% identical. It's just that now it's got made by the imported durable metal. So it changes your life, because if the bone one breaks, what are you going to do? You're out there ice fishing. What are you going to, it's going to take me at least a day, if not 2 days, to make one of the silly things. They're fragile. It's just bone. But this iron, So the French were making these, apparently, because they find them all over the coast and up into the Great Lakes in New York State. So we know it's a northern thing. It's more likely French. Maybe some English blacksmiths made them too, but generally we don't think so. And then finally, this is a beaver spear, which is a great segue into the fur trade. So this beaver spear, it's just a staple on the end of this. I put it in the groove and then lash it. And if I need to travel, I can unlash it and so on, cut another stick anywhere. But these dart heads, or for the smaller ones would be for muskrat. They just break the beaver huts open, or the muskrat with an axe on the ice, no bullet, no arrow, and just spear them. Because ultimately I want the fur. So fur, in the mini ice age of the 17th century, the European nobility are wearing fur hats, fur muffs, fur collars, fur this, fur that. So, because they had terrible chimney systems. It wasn't until 1717 they figured out how to do a flue. I mean, it's really on that level. They were just burning a very finite resource of hardwood. Think about how much hardwood. The peasants don't have hardwood. If you were a peasant in the Black Forest, you might pay a fee, and go out there and pick up little sticks. In fact, the day we shot the bear and I ran down the woods, I come running out onto the rails to trails, and I look, and there's this little old couple with this cart on the bike path, just like over here, and they're going down picking up sticks for their wood stove. And I just come up blundering out of the woods loaded for bear, as they say, and I put the gun down, and I casually just kind of walked out to them and asked them, have you seen anything unusual? I didn't want to scare him, and I'm looking around for this bear. I know he's close, and sure enough, he was never more than 150 feet from them. They didn't know it. I didn't really know. But once they took off, and there he was. I just stepped into the wood. There he was. But so the peasants are needing to get firewood. It's critical. So fur is important, but only for the nobility. But there was another purpose for fur. Yes, ma'am.
Can you eat the animals?
Absolutely. So the Indians nothing's going to waste.
Yeah.
So every